I was but 23 when we first sighted the accursed island. Our navigator, Master Ashworth, marked it upon his charts as naught but empty sea betwixt the established trading routes we knew so well. The heavens above were unmarred by cloud, and the ocean ran with barely a swell beneath our keel. We had departed from Havana Harbor some fortnight prior, our holds carrying a modest cargo of Sheffield steel tools, gunpowder from the king's own mills, and several chests filled with glass beads fashioned in the workshops of Bristol, trinkets intended for trade with whatever savage peoples we might encounter in these uncharted waters. Captain Edmund Blackwood, a stern Yorkshireman with iron in his veins and salt in his blood, desired nothing more than fresh water to replenish our depleted casks and good English oak, or whatever timber these foreign shores might offer, to repair our weather-beaten vessel. More than these practical necessities, however, he coveted something far more precious to a man of his ambition, a name upon the maritime charts that other sailors would read and speak of in the taverns of Portsmouth and Plymouth. He believed, with the unwavering conviction of a man who had survived 3 decades at sea, that this island would provide him with both resources and immortal fame. He stood upon the quarterdeck, one weathered hand resting upon the salt-worn rail, his gray eyes fixed upon the shoreline as it materialized from the morning mist like a dark brushstroke that gradually resolved itself into individual trees, jagged rocks, and the white foam of breaking surf. Our ship, the Providence, was a careworn caravel that had seen better days. She bore the scars of a dozen voyages across the Atlantic, her name a bitter irony given what fate had in store for us. The canvas sails were patched in so many places they resembled a beggar's coat, and the hemp ropes held true only if they were kept properly dampened with seawater. Our water casks were running dangerously low, and the salted pork we had been rationed tasted strongly of the pitch with which the barrels had been sealed, a flavor that turned my stomach even in the best of times. We had been surviving on short rations for nigh on a week, and I could feel the weakness creeping into my arms when I hauled upon the lines. My muscles trembled with fatigue that no amount of rest seemed to cure. William Rutherford, our boatswain, a burly Cornish man with forearms like ship's timbers, had developed a rattling cough that sounded particularly ominous during the night watches, echoing across the still water like a death knell. Henry Ashworth, our navigator and pilot, maintained a vigilant watch upon the soundings and studied the changing color of the water with the intensity of a man reading prophecies. He warned Captain Blackwood, in his precise Cambridge accent, that the seabed rose with alarming rapidity as we approached the island, and he strongly advised keeping our distance until we could locate a safe channel through what appeared to be an extensive reef system. Our complement numbered 14 souls aboard the Providence. I served as an able seaman, though in truth I performed whatever duties were required of me, a jack of all trades, as they say. Lieutenant Charles Pemberton commanded our small contingent of soldiers, a serious man from Hampshire who never went anywhere without his pike and kept his arquebus within arm's reach at all times, even when he slept. Father Benedict, our chaplain, wore his rosary at his belt and possessed a calming presence that could soothe a man waking from the most terrible of nightmares. Geoffrey Thornton, our ship's surgeon, kept his instruments, herbs, saws, and lancets, wrapped in a leather roll, and he despised the stench of the bilge more than any man I have ever known. Young Thomas Cooper was our cabin boy, barely 16 years of age, who had run messages and tended to the chickens until we had been forced to eat them during the previous week's storms. Robert Fletcher served as our master gunner, and he guarded the ship's powder with the zealous care a priest might reserve for the communion chalice. Edward Hawkins was a man from the Scilly Isles who spoke several languages picked up along the old trading routes to Africa and the Levant. He possessed a remarkable ear for foreign tongues and could handle a boat in rough seas better than any man I had sailed with. We stood off the island for some hours, studying it through Captain Blackwood's brass telescope. A reef encircled the northern approaches like a long, pale scar visible just beneath the surface. The southern shore presented what appeared to be a gap where dark water flowed with a steady current. Smoke rose from somewhere in the island's interior, but it did not climb in the thin, purposeful column one would expect from a cooking fire. Instead, it spread in a wide, dark stain that drifted low and sluggish across the treetops, as though reluctant to ascend to cleaner air. Even at a distance of several miles, the wind carried to us a faint smell, something like rendered fat mixed with salt, that made my stomach clench with unease. The captain ordered the anchor dropped in 30 fathoms of water and dispatched me along with Ashworth and Rutherford in the longboat to sound the channel and search for safe passage. We pulled hard upon the oars, our backs straining as we maneuvered along the reef's edge. The water near the shallows was remarkably clear. I could see schools of bright fish darting amongst the coral, but then it would suddenly plunge into darkness where the seabed dropped away into unseen depths. A strong current attempted to turn our bow, and several times we had to fight against it. Ashworth called out the depths as he lowered the lead line and drew it up again, examining the grains of sand and fragments of broken shells that adhered to the tallow coating its base with the attention of a scholar reading ancient texts. We rounded a small promontory and discovered a clean approach into a well-protected cove. The beach was composed of pale sand that gleamed almost white in the afternoon sun. A line of palm trees stood some distance back from the water's edge, swaying gently in the breeze. Behind them rose thicker vegetation, trees I could not identify, their canopies forming an impenetrable wall of green that concealed whatever lay in the island's interior. We saw no huts, no canoes drawn up on the sand, no human figures moving along the shore. There was only that persistent smoke drifting from somewhere inland, and a silence that felt somehow unnatural, as though the island itself were holding its breath. We returned to the Providence and made our report. Captain Blackwood listened to our description without interruption, his weathered face betraying no emotion. When we had finished, he gave orders for a landing party to go ashore at first light. He wanted 2 boats with 6 men in each, plus young Thomas Cooper to carry spare shot and powder. We were to take tools for cutting timber and empty barrels to fill with fresh water, assuming we could locate a stream or spring. Robert Fletcher loaded 2 small falconet swivel guns into the boats and covered them with tarps to protect them from the sea spray. Lieutenant Pemberton selected 4 men who could carry pikes without tripping over roots or their own feet in rough terrain. He issued me a short sword and a buckler shield, instructing me to keep them close at hand at all times. The weight of the weapons felt both reassuring and ominous, a reminder that we expected trouble. We slept that night in our clothes, ready to move at a moment's notice. The ocean swells lifted the hull in a gentle, rhythmic motion that my body had grown accustomed to over the months at sea. I lay in my hammock, staring up at the deck planks above me, listening to the ship's familiar sounds. Cordage rubbing through blocks, someone stirring a cup with a spoon, the quiet breathing of men who had exhausted their capacity for conversation. My mind kept returning to that smoke and the empty stretch of beach, and the peculiar way the birds had wheeled in a tight circle above the trees before vanishing all at once, as though responding to some signal invisible to our eyes. I told myself it signified nothing, merely the natural behavior of tropical birds I had never encountered before. Despite this reassurance, I did not sleep well. My rest was troubled by fragmented dreams of shapes moving through dark water and voices speaking in languages I could not comprehend. At first light, we lowered the boats with practiced efficiency. The water inside the reef lay smooth as polished glass, and the shore looked deceptively close, though I knew from experience that distances over water could be treacherous to judge. We rowed in silence, save for the rhythmic counting that helped us maintain our stroke. Sand grated beneath the keel as we ran the boats up onto the beach, and Lieutenant Pemberton was the first to leap out, pike in hand, establishing a defensive perimeter whilst we unloaded the barrels and tools. Geoffrey Thornton and I carried the surgeon's leather roll of instruments and a spade. The air on land possessed a peculiar quality, heavy and still, as though it were a physical weight pressing down upon us. That smell of rendered fat was significantly stronger here, and it definitely did not emanate from our boats or our men. We walked along the line of palm trees, searching for any sign of fresh water. The sand gradually gave way to darker soil carpeted with fallen leaves that released a musty odor when crushed beneath our boots. Our feet sank slightly into the soft ground, leaving clear impressions. It was then that we discovered the tracks. At first glance, I mistook them for the prints of a large man who went barefoot, perhaps one of the native peoples known to inhabit these islands. Then I observed the spacing between one footfall and the next. The stride was longer than I could manage even if I ran at full speed. The heel had sunk deep into the earth under tremendous weight. The toes, and I counted only 4 distinct impressions, were spread unusually wide and pressed into the ground with a force that left indentations like broad spatulas. Rutherford knelt beside one of these prints and placed his palm inside it experimentally. His fingers, even with his hand fully extended, could not reach from one edge to the other. "Some manner of beast," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Hawkins shook his head slowly, his expression troubled. "There are no claw marks," he pointed out. 4 toes only, like a man's foot, but—" He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Lieutenant Pemberton studied the tracks for a long moment, his jaw working as he ground his teeth, a habit I had noticed he displayed when deeply concerned. "Keep moving," he ordered finally, deliberately not looking at the prints again. "Stay alert." We discovered a source of fresh water perhaps an hour later. A stream descended from the higher ground inland, cutting a narrow channel through the vegetation before emptying into the sea. The water, when we tasted it, was clean and sweet, a blessed relief after weeks of drinking from increasingly stale casks. We heard nothing except the gentle flow of the current and the persistent drone of insects. We set several men to filling the barrels whilst Rutherford and Fletcher selected a straight tree suitable for fashioning a new yard, trimming away the branches and stacking them in a neat pile. Father Benedict walked along the stream bank, examining the unfamiliar plants with the curiosity of a natural philosopher. He remarked that they resembled species he had observed on other islands in this region, though these specimens seemed notably thicker and taller, as though the soil here possessed some unusual fertility. I asked him why the birds remained so conspicuously silent. He admitted he had no answer, and I could see my own unease reflected in his eyes. We followed the stream a short distance inland to ensure the flow remained consistent. At a bend in the watercourse, we came upon something that stopped us all in our tracks and turned our blood to ice water. Human bones, arranged in a deliberate pile. They had not been buried or scattered by animals. Someone, or something, had stacked them with apparent care. The pile contained long bones, ribs, and skulls. The skulls had been split cleanly down the center, the bone work showing marks of stone or perhaps crude iron tools. The long bones were cracked open lengthwise, the splits appearing relatively fresh. Grease from the extracted marrow had stained the surrounding soil a dark, oily color. The smell of smoke clung to this place like an invisible shroud, though no fire currently burned. Thornton crouched over a femur, a thigh bone, and spoke in a low, clinical tone that barely concealed his horror. "These are human remains," he confirmed. "Men and women both, judging by the size variation. The skulls show both small and large specimens. The cuts were made with stone implements or perhaps very crude iron, not clean surgical cuts, but whoever did this knew precisely where to strike to access the contents." Father Benedict crossed himself with a trembling hand, then steadied it with visible effort. Lieutenant Pemberton surveyed the surrounding trees and the open ground beyond, his eyes constantly moving, searching for threats. "Return to the boats," he commanded quietly. "The captain needs to see this immediately." No one argued. We backed away from that terrible pile, keeping our weapons ready and our eyes fixed on the surrounding brush. Every shadow seemed to hold potential danger. Every rustling leaf might conceal a watcher. When we reached the beach, we discovered that our temporary camp had been disturbed during our absence. The barrels we had filled remained where we had left them, and the swivel guns lay covered and apparently untouched. However, a bundle of spare oars had been scattered across the sand, and one lay snapped cleanly across a rock, broken as easily as a man might snap a twig. A makeshift shelter of palm fronds that young Thomas Cooper had erected over the powder casks had been crushed flat, as though something enormously heavy had stepped upon it. The sand bore fresh tracks, the same impossible prints we had observed by the stream. They walked from the tree line to our boats, circled around the barrels in what seemed like a deliberate inspection, then returned to the trees. One set of prints stopped very close to the bow of our longboat and turned. The creature had stood there, studying the boat's interior. Fletcher lifted the tarp from one of the swivel guns and checked the touch hole with shaking fingers. He made a small, choked sound when he discovered that the slow match had been removed, plucked away as casually as a man might pick an apple. I found it lying near the cold remains of our fire pit. Beside it lay a length of rope we had cut the previous day. Someone had tied this rope into an intricate knot I had never seen before, a complex weaving that held tight under tension. The knot seemed to mock our presence, demonstrating a level of sophistication that made the situation even more unsettling. Lieutenant Pemberton called us into a defensive circle. His jaw worked again, grinding his teeth, and then he spoke in a carefully controlled voice. "We do not separate," he stated firmly. "We maintain distance between ourselves and the tree line at all times. We move the barrels to the boats immediately and get them aboard the ship. The captain will bring us reinforcements, more men, perhaps horses if there is a suitable landing point through the reef. Until then, no one wanders off alone." He looked at young Thomas Cooper. "Lad, you stay beside Hawkins at all times. If anything moves from that brush, you shout with all the air in your lungs. Understood?" Cooper nodded, his face pale but determined. We worked until our backs burned with exhaustion and our hands were raw from hauling heavy loads. The sun climbed higher, pressing down upon us like a physical weight, and the air seemed to thicken until each breath required conscious effort. The only sounds beyond our own labored breathing and the scraping of barrels across sand were the gentle hiss of foam washing upon the shore and the quiet trickle of the stream. No birds sang. No animals called from the forest. When the barrels were finally secured in the boats, we loaded the timber we had cut. I took the final trip carrying a bundle of poles balanced across my shoulder. At the water's edge, I paused. The sand beneath my feet trembled, a single, distinct vibration. It did not originate from the sea. The tremor came from inland, transmitted through the earth itself. A tree at the forest's edge bent low under some tremendous weight, then slowly straightened as the weight moved on. Another tree did the same slightly farther along the tree line. Then the vegetation settled back into stillness, as though nothing had happened. We pushed off from the shore and rowed with desperate energy back to the Providence, hauling the first load of water and timber. On deck, we reported everything we had witnessed to Captain Blackwood. He summoned Ashworth to the rail and studied the cove through his telescope for several long minutes. When he finally spoke, he did not take his eyes from the shore. "We shall move closer," he declared, "as close as we dare. I will not abandon good water and valuable timber because of footprints and bones. Men leave tracks. Men can be dealt with one way or another." The anchor chain rattled up through the hawse hole, dripping seawater across the deck. We maneuvered into the channel with minimal canvas, using just enough sail to maintain steerage against the current. The reef bared its teeth on both sides, jagged coral that would rip our hull open like paper if we strayed from the safe passage. The hull shuddered each time a swell lifted us, and I could hear the timbers groaning. Ashworth stood at the bow, calling out depth readings as he worked the lead line. Captain Blackwood gripped the whipstaff as though he could pull the island toward us through sheer force of will. We dropped anchor perhaps 200 yards from the beach, close enough that I could see the broken oar and the mysterious knot from the deck. We ferried the second load near midday. The beach appeared unchanged from our first landing, except that the tracks in the sand were fresh again, new prints laid over our own. Another set crossed the stream at a point where we had not crossed. In the soft mud beside the water's edge, we discovered the impression of a knee and, beside it, a hand print. That hand print covered my entire forearm from wrist to elbow. The span of it was simply impossible for any normal man. Thornton noted that the skin had left a faint trace of ash in the mud. Whoever or whatever had knelt here had been coated in the residue of fires. Father Benedict warned us to exercise extreme caution regarding what we touched. He said, with admirable understatement, that we were clearly walking among things we did not properly understand. We worked faster after that discovery, driven by a mounting sense of dread. Lieutenant Pemberton stationed 2 men with pikes facing the trees at all times. Fletcher primed one of the swivel guns on shore and aimed it directly at the brush. He set a length of slow match burning and instructed Thomas Cooper to watch the glowing ember with unwavering attention. If it went out, we would have no way to fire the gun quickly. Rutherford and I dragged a felled tree trunk toward the boats. My boots dug deep into the wet sand with each step. The trunk moved inch by painful inch. I counted my breaths, trying to establish a rhythm, and threw my back into the effort. The sand trembled again, 3 distinct vibrations in a slow, measured count, like the footfalls of something impossibly large approaching with deliberate steps. The birds suddenly returned in a frantic, swirling cloud, hundreds of them, crying out in apparent terror, and then they flew away over the water as one, as though fleeing from a predator. The brush at the forest's edge parted briefly and then closed. I caught only the briefest glimpse, a dark shape, massive and indistinct, and then nothing but leaves. We formed a defensive semicircle instinctively, raising our weapons. No one spoke. The air carried that smell of rendered fat again, much stronger than before, mixed with something sour and acrid that stung my nostrils and made my eyes water. Rutherford and I lifted the trunk with one final desperate effort and staggered the last few steps to the boat. We shoved off without waiting for orders from Lieutenant Pemberton. As our keel slid into deeper water, I looked back at the sand. New prints appeared as the water withdrew from the beach and were washed away as the next wave rolled in. The spacing between prints indicated a stride longer than any human could make. The depth suggested tremendous weight. I felt my hands trembling as I fitted the oars into their locks. On the journey back to the Providence, I glanced over my shoulder at the tree line. For just a moment, no more than a heartbeat, I thought I saw a face among the leaves. Not a mask, not war paint, but a pale shape suspended between branches at approximately twice the height of a tall man. The leaves shifted in a breeze I could not feel, and then everything was still. I told no one what I had seen. I knew it might have been merely my own fear manifesting as hallucination. I kept rowing, counting strokes under my breath, trying to maintain even breathing and calm my racing heart. The island did not feel empty or abandoned. It felt awake, watchful, measuring us, calculating our weaknesses. I did not like that thought, but it lodged in my mind and would not be dislodged. We ate our midday meal on deck, keeping our weapons and equipment close at hand. Captain Blackwood ordered 2 more supply runs to the cove before sunset. He moved a chest of glass beads and iron nails to the quarterdeck, stating his intention to test whether gifts left at the tree line might induce whoever inhabited this place to reveal themselves. Lieutenant Pemberton requested permission to plant a marker on the beach warning other mariners away from this cursed place. The captain granted permission. He rather liked the demonstration of English resolve it represented. On our 3rd trip ashore that day, we discovered a structure we had somehow failed to notice during our earlier visits. It stood just beyond the palm trees in a patch of hard-packed ground, partially concealed by hanging vines. The frame was constructed from thick timbers lashed together with plant fiber, standing taller than a man by at least a head's height. Skulls hung from the crosspieces, suspended by cords threaded through holes bored in the bone. They had been meticulously scraped clean of all flesh. In the center of the frame, a vertical pole displayed a grotesque decoration, a belt fashioned from human ribs and a length of woven hair. A round stone, dark with stains I preferred not to identify, lay beneath the structure as though it had been used as an anvil for breaking bones. The suspension cords were worn smooth from repeated handling. This was clearly a site that received regular attention. Flies gathered at the base of the frame in a thick, buzzing mass, drawn by grease that had clotted the soil. Hawkins crouched to examine the lashings more closely, his face grim. "This knot originates from no place I have ever visited," he said quietly. "It locks tight when pulled and leaves a peculiar small loop here. Whoever tied these has extensive practice, years of it, I should think." We instinctively stepped back from the macabre display. The air hung utterly motionless. Thornton spoke half to himself, his surgeon's mind attempting to make clinical sense of horror. "These are trophies," he concluded. "This frame serves as a marker of territory, not a burial site. It is meant to be seen, a warning or perhaps a boast." Lieutenant Pemberton spat into the dirt and placed his boot upon the stained stone. "Let them see we are not frightened," he declared, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. He used the tip of his pike to flip one of the skulls from its cord. It rolled once across the ground and came to rest facing us, empty eye sockets staring accusingly. Father Benedict told him sharply to cease, but Pemberton turned away with a short, barking laugh that never reached his eyes. We returned to the beach with a final load of timber and a net filled with shellfish we had gathered from rocks near the stream mouth. The sand around our boats bore yet another addition to the growing catalog of inexplicable signs. A large fish, as long as a tall man, lay split open with its internal organs removed with surgical precision. The head had been twisted off with tremendous force and placed beside the body. A sprig of leaves rested carefully upon the fish's flank. The skin displayed cuts arranged in a deliberate pattern running from tail to belly, marks our knives could never have made in that tough hide. The plant's sprig emitted an odor that made my tongue feel numb and my lips tingle unpleasantly. An offering, Hawkins suggested, studying the arrangement with narrowed eyes. Or a warning, Fletcher countered grimly. We pushed off without further debate and climbed aboard the Providence before the light failed completely. Captain Blackwood ordered both boats secured and towed astern. He had a falconet trained on the channel entrance. He commanded that slow match be lit at both swivel guns and kept burning throughout the night. A longbow was strung and placed near the rail with a full quiver of arrows. Fletcher set a double charge of powder in one swivel and obsessively checked the vent 3 times to ensure it was clear. The captain instructed Ashworth to make careful note of the time and the state of the tide. He wanted detailed records of how the current shifted at dusk within the channel, information that might prove crucial if we needed to make a hasty departure. He had us run additional anchor lines to steady the bow and keep us pointed toward the open sea. Night descended upon the cove like a smothering blanket. The island showed not a single light in its interior, no campfires burned on the beach, no torches moved among the trees. The water lay almost perfectly flat, disturbed only by small ripples where fish rose to feed on insects. We ate our evening meal in shifts, and Captain Blackwood paced the deck continuously, pausing frequently to listen with his head cocked to one side. Father Benedict spoke softly with young Thomas Cooper, offering what comfort he could, and gave the lad a small wooden cross he had carved during previous voyages, a talisman he had gifted to other frightened boys far from home. Cooper closed his hand tightly around it and nodded his thanks, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Near midnight, a sound drifted across the water from the reef, a rhythmic knocking of stones, as though something were testing the coral structure. Then came a splash, like a body dropping from a considerable height into deep water. The hull trembled, not from any wave, but from something making contact with our vessel. Fletcher ran to the rail with a lantern held high. A dark shape, massive and indistinct, slid along the planking below the waterline and vanished toward our stern. Another impact struck the rudder, and the whipstaff jumped violently in its socket. Ashworth swore under his breath and threw his full weight against it to keep us steady. We heard breathing close to the waterline, not through a nose, but through an open mouth, slow and steady and terribly deliberate. A hand rose above the starboard rail, just the fingers at first, spread wide, testing the hull surface as one might test a tree before climbing it. The fingers were as thick as belaying pins. "Stand ready," Captain Blackwood commanded quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the darkness. "Do not discharge your weapons unless I give the order." A head rose briefly into the circle of lantern light. Wet hair was plastered against a broad forehead. Eyes reflected the lantern glow with an unsettling lack of color, like an animal's eyes caught by firelight. The head sank back beneath the surface with barely a ripple. One of our mooring lines went suddenly slack, then drew taut again with a sharp snap. The bow line dipped toward the water as though something were pulling it hand over hand from below, testing its strength. The knot held firm. The tension ceased, then resumed with greater force. The rope creaked ominously, fibers beginning to separate under the strain. "Cut it," Lieutenant Pemberton urged. "Wait," the captain countermanded. The pulling stopped abruptly. A low voice spoke from the darkness, the same incomprehensible word we had heard earlier near the frame of skulls. Another voice answered from the opposite side of our vessel. The sound was not angry or aggressive, it was matter-of-fact, like workmen discussing a task. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the assault ceased. They released our lines. The rope lifted free of strain. The breathing sounds faded into the distance. We remained at our posts with weapons ready, every nerve stretched taut, for what felt like hours. Eventually, Ashworth cautiously eased the whipstaff back to center. The captain ordered the watch changed every hour, with 2 men stationed on each side of the vessel and 1 at the stern, all armed and alert. Before dawn broke, the smell reached us. It came when the wind shifted, blowing from the island across our anchorage. The stench arrived like a physical assault, burned fat, cooked meat, and beneath it all a sickly sweetness that turned my stomach and brought bile rising in my throat. We stood downwind, fighting nausea, and said nothing. I thought of the bones beside the stream, of the skulls hanging on their cords, and I understood without needing Thornton's medical expertise what that smell signified. Then a second odor arrived, a charred scent reminiscent of resin or pitch being sealed. Fletcher lifted his head sharply. Pitch, he identified. They are sealing something, preserving it. At first light, we could see that the beach had been transformed overnight. Our board marked with the cross, our claim to this territory in the name of His Majesty, had been moved. It now leaned against the powder keg we had left behind. The chest of beads stood open and empty, its contents taken. In place of the beads, the frame of skulls had been repositioned between the board and the keg, as though the 3 items now formed a single unified message. A long pole had been planted beside this arrangement. At its top hung a fresh scalp, the hair dark, long, and matted with oil. The scalp had not been taken from any member of our crew. The hair was far too long for any of our men. It appeared to be a woman's scalp, though from what unfortunate victim I could not imagine. Captain Blackwood studied the beach through his telescope for several minutes, then handed the glass to me without comment. The pole and frame stood motionless. No figures were visible at the tree line. The stream continued its gentle flow. The sand around the pole was trampled with dozens of overlapping prints, creating an intricate, chaotic pattern. "We shall not be toyed with like children," Captain Blackwood declared, his voice hard as Sheffield steel. He turned to Lieutenant Pemberton. "We go inland today. We locate their encampment. We demonstrate to these savages that we are not prey to be stalked and tested at their leisure." Hawkins stepped forward respectfully. "Captain, with your permission, might we attempt one more peaceful exchange? They came to our line last night. They took the iron nails I offered. They did not damage our boats. We might yet trade iron for timber and water. We could depart without bloodshed." Pemberton shook his head firmly. "They tasted our ship," he countered. "They tested our ropes and our defenses. Next time they will test our throats. We must show strength." Father Benedict looked from the beach to the assembled men, his face troubled. "If we venture inland," he said carefully, "we must proceed with utmost caution. We take only what supplies we require for one day's march, and we do not chase shadows into ambushes. We maintain a clear line of retreat back to these boats at all times." Captain Blackwood nodded once, decisive. 14 men ashore, he ordered. Both swivel guns, powder sufficient for prolonged engagement, water skins, and rations for the day. We shall blaze trail marks every 20 paces. Ashworth will keep the Providence ready to weigh anchor immediately if the wind shifts unfavorably. I checked the edge of my sword and discovered a small nick that I carefully filed smooth using a whetstone from my kit. I forced down a heel of hard bread and drank from the water dipper, feeling the liquid sit heavy and cold in my anxious stomach. I told myself to keep my footsteps light and my eyes open for any sign of danger. I reminded myself that I had felt this same dread before on different shores and had lived to tell the tale. The memory helped somewhat, though not enough. We lowered the boats once more. The men climbed in with equipment balanced precariously across their knees. The morning sun provided little warmth. The light seemed thin and weak, unable to penetrate the heavy atmosphere that hung over the island. The vegetation waited in ominous silence. I did not like that unnatural quiet. It felt wrong, as though every living creature with sense had fled this place. We ran the boats up onto the sand and established the swivel guns on their low pivot stands. Fletcher selected a position offering a clear field of fire into the gap between 2 particularly large trees. He primed both weapons with meticulous care and laid out lengths of slow match. Pemberton arranged us in a column with pikes at the vanguard. The arquebusiers took positions in the second rank, with swordsmen behind them. He assigned me to the right flank as scout, instructing me to mark trees at eye level with my knife, clear blazes that we could follow back if we needed to retreat quickly. Hawkins would listen for any sounds suggesting language or signals we might interpret. Thornton would collect anything he found that might help us understand what we faced. Father Benedict would keep watch on the men's mental state and morale rather than fixating on shadows among the trees. We passed the skull frame and the pole without touching them. The fresh scalp hung motionless. No breeze stirred it. Flies clustered upon it in a seething mass, their buzzing the only sound breaking the silence. We entered the forest and the character of the light changed immediately. The tree trunks rose straight and tall, some of enormous girth, and vines hung like curtains between them. The ground was treacherously uneven with protruding roots and rotting stumps. The air possessed a damp weight that made breathing difficult. We advanced in a measured rhythm, weapons ready. Every few steps, I cut a small but distinctive blaze in the bark at eye level, marks we could follow in retreat. 10 minutes into the forest, we discovered a path beaten into the undergrowth. This was certainly not a deer track or any animal trail. The path was wide enough to accommodate 4 men walking abreast with ease. At the edges, broken twigs and crushed vegetation showed where something large had brushed past repeatedly over a considerable period of time. The path carried that same faint sour smell we had noticed before, a distinctive odor that made my nostrils flare and my stomach clench. We moved onto the path with our pikes held tight to the vanguard. Pemberton raised his hand for silence, though none of us had been speaking. I heard a heavy thud somewhere to our left, then complete silence. Another sound came from our right, farther off, the unmistakable sound of something massive moving through the forest. Pemberton raised his hand and we froze where we stood. He pointed with 2 fingers toward the source of the sound, and the arquebusiers lifted their heavy weapons to aim in that direction, the slow matches smoldering and sending up thin trails of smoke. We waited in that frozen tableau, scarcely daring to breathe. No further sounds came. The forest had returned to its unnatural silence. The path began to climb upward, winding between massive tree trunks, then leveled onto flatter ground. We emerged into a clearing, and what we saw there made my blood run cold despite the oppressive heat. In the center of the clearing stood 3 large racks, woven from heavy branches and positioned low to the ground. Upon these racks lay cuts of meat, unmistakably human flesh, drying over small fires of smoky embers covered with damp leaves to produce maximum smoke and minimum flame. At the far side of the clearing, a pit had been excavated and lined with stones blackened by intense heat. Waves of warmth still rose from it, distorting the air above. A round stone, larger than a man's head and stained dark with what could only be blood, sat near the pit's edge. Between 2 stout posts, a line had been strung from which hung lengths of sinew and strips of skin, carefully pegged out to dry like a tanner's workshop in hell. A human jawbone, still bearing its full complement of teeth, had been tied to one post, apparently to prevent it from curling as it dried. The teeth gleamed white in the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. No one spoke. My mouth had gone completely dry, my tongue feeling like leather. Young Thomas Cooper stared at the racks with eyes wide as saucers, gripping his knife so tightly that his knuckles had turned bone white. Fletcher stepped cautiously toward the pit and held his hand above it, careful not to touch the stones. "They roasted a body here not long ago," he reported in a hollow voice. The stones still retained considerable heat. Thornton knelt beside the drying racks and studied the cuts of meat without touching them, his surgeon's training allowing him to maintain clinical detachment even in the face of such horror. When he spoke, his voice was flat and emotionless, the only way, I suspect, he could force the words out. Human thigh, shoulder, rib meat, he catalogued methodically. They remove the fat and the prime muscle groups. They understand anatomy well enough to butcher efficiently. They know the techniques for preserving meat through smoking and drying. Hawkins had walked to the clearing's edge and was pointing at something in the soft earth. "A child," he said quietly. "Small steps, bare feet. There are women and children here, not merely warriors." A sound came from the opposite side of the clearing, the distinctive crack of a substantial branch bending under weight, then straightening. Every man lifted his weapon without needing orders. Pemberton's voice carried low and hard as iron. "Form defensive positions," he commanded. "No one breaks ranks and runs. If they charge, the pikes receive them first. Arquebusiers fire only on my explicit command. Aim for the legs. I want one alive for questioning if possible." I swallowed hard and rolled my shoulders once, trying to ease the terrible tension that had locked my muscles. I told myself to watch for the first movement in the leaves, to see the threat a heartbeat before the others so I could provide warning. I wanted desperately to be useful, to justify my presence in this nightmare. The brush ahead of us moved again, but this time the movement was different. Not the random stirring of wind, but a steady, deliberate parting as though a body of considerable bulk were sliding through the undergrowth with surprising patience and stealth. A shadow filled the gap between two trees. Then a face emerged, different from any we had glimpsed before. This one bore scars running from ear to jaw in a ladder pattern, as though someone had marked him deliberately for identification or rank. The eyes held a flat, dead calm that was somehow more terrifying than rage would have been. He took a single step into the clearing and stopped, standing utterly motionless. He looked at our defensive line, then at the drying racks, then back to us. He made a short, guttural sound behind him, a signal of some kind. More shapes gathered in the forest shadows. The scarred man stood absolutely still, his weight distributed evenly on both legs, his broad chest bare and gleaming with what might have been oil or sweat. Behind him, 5 more figures stepped from the brush one at a time with the measured patience of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to flee. They carried clubs fashioned from what appeared to be root balls studded with natural knots like stones, spears of black wood tipped with sharpened bone, and one carried a bow strung with what looked like animal gut, with a bundle of arrows tied with grass slung across his back. Their height made our pikes look pitifully inadequate, like toys in the hands of children facing adults. The smell of smoke and rendered grease clung to their skin like a physical presence. One wore a necklace of knuckle bones that clicked together when he moved, creating a sound like dice rattling in a cup. Another had bound a strip of torn, stained cloth around his head like a band, perhaps a trophy taken from some previous encounter with European sailors. A third bore ritual scarification across his massive chest and arms, raised welts forming patterns I could not interpret but which clearly held significance. They did not rush forward in a wild charge. They spread out methodically along the clearing's edge, silent save for the occasional crack of branches beneath their enormous feet. The scarred one, clearly their leader, lifted one hand, and the others held their positions. He pointed with 2 fingers at the drying racks, then at us. His voice was remarkably deep and carried across the clearing without any apparent effort. He spoke a single word, then repeated it with slight variation in inflection. Hawkins strained to catch the sounds, mouthing them silently to himself, trying to parse meaning from the alien phonemes. "He says eat or food," Hawkins translated uncertainly. He points at us, then at the racks. I believe he is identifying us as potential food." Pemberton raised his pike and responded in Spanish, the only language besides English that most of us shared, keeping his voice level but filling it with steel. "We are not meat," he declared forcefully. "We are not yours to take." His tone was iron-hard, but I noticed his jaw working as he ground his teeth, that telltale sign of deep anxiety. The scarred leader looked at the racks again, then made the same gesture toward us with greater deliberateness. He tapped his own substantial belly with the flat of his palm and displayed his teeth in what might have been a grin. The teeth were long and broad, stained yellow, filed to points. He repeated the word a 3rd time, louder now, as though speaking to children or idiots who failed to comprehend simple concepts. Behind him, one of the giants chuckled, a low, rumbling sound like distant thunder. He spat casually to one side. The archer knocked an arrow to his bowstring but did not draw it, letting it hang loose on the gut string, a clear threat that could become lethal action in the space of a heartbeat. The others shifted their weight, muscles tensing beneath ash-smeared skin, clearly preparing to move. The ground beneath our feet suddenly felt very small, a tiny island of English authority surrounded by an ocean of hostile savagery. My hand ached around the sword grip from the force with which I was squeezing it. Fletcher whispered through clenched teeth. "If they close the distance, shoot immediately. A musket ball will shatter bone at this range, even bone as thick as theirs." Pemberton's voice remained steady, though I could hear the tremendous effort that steadiness required. "Not yet," he countermanded. "Hold your fire. We shoot when they break the distance, not before. We do not provoke them into action." Father Benedict, God bless his brave soul, stepped forward half a pace beyond our defensive line, his hand raised in the universal gesture of peaceful greeting. He spoke in calm, measured Latin, the blessing for peace and divine protection that had been old when Rome still ruled the world. The words rolled out low and even, neither rushed nor weak, carrying across the clearing with peculiar clarity. The giants watched him with what might have been curiosity. The scarred leader tilted his head to one side like a dog hearing an unfamiliar sound, as though listening to a story in a language he had never encountered but found vaguely interesting. For a long, suspended moment, none of the others moved. The entire clearing seemed to hold its breath. Then the one wearing the necklace of knucklebones leaned forward and spoke a long string of words in his own incomprehensible language, the syllables harsh and guttural. He slapped his stomach with both hands and barked a laugh, a sound utterly devoid of humor. He pointed his club directly at young Thomas Cooper, who had gone pale as a ghost and rigid as a board, frozen in place by sheer terror. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears like a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil. The air pressed against my chest with suffocating weight, making each breath a conscious effort. I wanted desperately to strike first or to run, but my legs held firm where they stood, rooted by training and the fear that running would trigger the predatory chase instinct these creatures surely possessed. I thought of the Providence waiting in the cove, her lanterns ready to be lit, her sails furled but ready to drop at a moment's notice. The path back through the forest seemed impossibly long, a gauntlet that could close at any moment, trapping us here with these man-eaters. Hawkins took a slow, careful step forward, moving with the exaggerated caution of a man approaching a dangerous animal. He held out an iron knife flat upon his palm where it could be clearly seen. He spoke the word he believed meant food, then added the words for water, iron, and friend in several of the island languages he had learned during his trading years. He pointed at the knife, then at the drying racks, then back to our group. His voice shook slightly on the first word, then steadied as he found his courage. "Trade," he said clearly in English, knowing they would not understand the word but hoping the tone would convey meaning. "Trade. We offer iron. Good iron from England. You give us water and timber. We trade as friends, not enemies." The scarred leader's eyes fixed upon the knife with sudden, intense interest. He spoke rapidly to the archer, who lowered his arrow and allowed the bowstring to slacken slightly, still ready but no longer immediately threatening. The scarred one stepped forward 2 paces, close enough now that I could see individual scars beneath his ribs, old wounds from battles or rituals I could not begin to imagine. He extended his hand, and I saw that his fingers were as thick as the branches we had cut for timber, the nails cracked and yellow, caked with substances I preferred not to identify. Hawkins laid the knife carefully across that massive palm. The giant closed his hand around it and tested the edge against his thumb with casual pressure. Blood welled immediately where the sharp steel touched flesh, a bright red bead against ash-gray skin. He looked at the blood without any visible reaction, then brought his thumb to his mouth and licked it clean. His tongue came away red. He examined the knife more closely, turning it this way and that in the dappled sunlight, clearly impressed by the quality of English steel. He spoke a short, sharp command. The others immediately shifted backward a step, a clear sign of his authority over them. He turned the knife in his hand once more, testing its balance, then pointed with it toward the path we had blazed coming inland, the route marked by my knife cuts leading back toward the beach. He spoke a single word that sounded vaguely like, "Go," or at least, that was the meaning his tone conveyed. He repeated it with considerably more force, pointing again with the knife. Then he lifted the blade high as though displaying it to unseen watchers in the forest, demonstrating that he had claimed it as his possession. His grin widened, revealing more of those filed, yellowed teeth. He tapped the blade against his chest once, twice, 3 times, a gesture of ownership, then pointed at us, then again toward the path with unmistakable emphasis. "Go!" The word carried clearly this time, whether it was their language or an approximation of ours learned from previous encounters with Europeans. Pemberton's jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. "He dismisses us," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "He sends us away like beggars or children." His knuckles whitened on the pike shaft, and for a terrible moment I thought he might refuse the implicit order, might attack and damn the consequences. But slowly, with visible effort, he lowered the pike until its tip touched the earth. He spat once to the side, a gesture of contempt, never taking his eyes from the scarred leader. "We accept their terms this time," he said quietly. "We retreat in good order. But by God, we are not finished here." We backed toward the path that would lead us to safety, moving in formation, no man turning his back on the giants. They did not follow, though their eyes tracked our every movement with the patient attention of hunters watching prey escape, this time. The archer kept his arrow nocked but aimed at the ground. The scarred leader watched every step we took, his expression unreadable. When the last of our men reached the path, he raised the knife high above his head and barked a single word, harsh and commanding. The others answered him with deep voices all at once, creating a wall of sound that seemed to emanate from the earth itself and bounce back from the trees. The volume of it made my chest vibrate and my ears ring. It was not quite a war cry, not quite a chant, something in between, laden with meaning I could not grasp but which spoke of power and ownership and absolute confidence. Then, as suddenly as they had begun, they fell silent. The forest swallowed the echoes and returned to its oppressive quiet. We moved with desperate speed along the path we had marked, following my knife blazes as they gleamed pale against dark bark in the shadows beneath the canopy. I kept glancing behind us every few steps, expecting at any moment to see those massive shapes come crashing through the undergrowth in pursuit. But the brush remained empty behind us, no sounds of pursuit, nothing but our own labored breathing and the thud of boots on soft earth. When we burst from the tree line onto the beach, the swivel guns stood exactly where we had left them, untouched and ready. The pole bearing the fresh scalps still leaned at its grotesque angle near our marker board. The flies had multiplied, forming a black, seething cloud. The boats waited in the shallows, looking pathetically small and fragile, our only means of escape from this nightmare shore. We hauled the boats into deeper water without pause, without looking back, driven by a primal need to put distance between ourselves and that clearing with its racks of human meat. On board the Providence, Captain Blackwood heard our report in complete silence, his weathered face betraying no emotion. When we had finished describing everything we had witnessed, he stood utterly still for a long time, staring at the island's green wall of vegetation. Then he spoke, and his words carried the weight of absolute finality. "They own this island," he stated flatly. "We cannot break them with the force we have at our disposal. We have obtained water. We have secured timber. We shall not remain here pursuing glory or conquest or revenge. We mark this place as cursed ground on every chart we produce, and we depart with the morning tide." His tone left no space for argument or discussion. The decision was made. That night we lay at anchor one final time in the cursed cove. No shapes moved in the dark water around our hull. No hands tested our ropes. But far inland, visible even from our position offshore, we saw a glow against the night sky, a fire burning high and fierce, much larger than any cooking fire. The smell of rendered fat carried across the water once more, thick and cloying and unmistakable. Men shifted restlessly in their hammocks, unable to find sleep, turning on their blankets and muttering prayers. I lay awake in the darkness, listening to the faint sound of voices drifting across the water from that distant fire. Deep voices, steady and rhythmic, like men singing to maintain the pace of communal labor. The sound carried remarkably far in the still night air, a reminder that we were not alone, that we were being watched and measured and found wanting. The voices did not cease until the first gray light of dawn began to paint the eastern horizon. We weighed anchor with the sunrise, letting the ebbing tide carry us through the channel toward open water. The reef broke white and violent on both sides of our passage, reaching for us with coral teeth but missing by yards. We maneuvered carefully under Ashworth's expert guidance, every man holding his breath until we cleared the last of the shallows. The island slipped slowly astern, the green wall of vegetation gradually blurring into the sky until it became indistinguishable from clouds on the horizon. I remained at the rail long after most men had returned to their duties, watching until I could no longer distinguish the island from the empty sea. My arms ached from the labor of hauling on lines and working the capstan, but I kept my eyes fixed on our wake. I thought about the knife now in the scarred giant's possession, English steel in the hands of a cannibal who ruled his territory with absolute authority. I thought about the racks and the pits and the skulls hanging on cords like macabre fruit. I knew with absolute certainty that I would never willingly set foot on that shore again. But I also knew, with equal certainty, that others would come. Ships would sight that island, thinking it uninhabited or easily conquered. Captains would send men ashore seeking fresh water and timber, just as we had done. And those men would discover, too late, what manner of creatures dwelt in those forests, giants who knew the art of butchery, who displayed their trophies without shame, who viewed European sailors not as traders or threats but simply as another variety of meat. Epilogue. A warning unheeded. The Providence reached Havana 3 weeks later, battered but intact. Captain Blackwood filed his report with the colonial authorities, describing an island inhabited by savages of unusual size and evident cannibalistic practices. He marked it clearly on his charts with warnings in both Spanish and English. Avoid. Hostile natives. Extreme danger. The charts were copied and distributed to other mariners, as was customary. Some believed the warnings. Others dismissed them as exaggeration or cowardice, the sort of tales sailors told to make themselves seem brave or to discourage competition for resources. 2 years later, I heard from a Portuguese trader that a Spanish galleon had stopped at an uncharted island matching our description. Of the 20 men who went ashore seeking water, only 3 returned. They reported giants who attacked without warning, who carried men away into the forest despite their armor and weapons. The survivors fled, leaving their dead behind. 5 years after our encounter, an English privateer ignored the warnings and anchored in what I believe was the same cove. The ship was found weeks later by a passing merchantman, drifting and abandoned. The boats were gone. No bodies were found aboard, though the deck bore signs of struggle, dried blood, broken weapons, and scattered personal effects. In the captain's cabin, someone had carved a message into the table with a knife. They came from the water. God save us. I am an old man now, my sailing days long behind me. I set down this account so that others might learn from our experience and perhaps avoid the same fate. The island still appears on some charts, marked with various warnings, but I know that warnings are not always heeded. There are always men who believe themselves stronger, cleverer, or more fortunate than those who came before. To those men, I say this. If you sight an island where smoke drifts low across the treetops, where the beaches show no signs of habitation but the forest holds secrets, where the birds fall silent and the air smells of rendered fat, sail on. Do not anchor. Do not send men ashore. Some lands belong to those who inhabit them, and some inhabitants view all strangers as nothing more than meat. We were fortunate to escape with our lives. Many who came after us were not so blessed. I pray this account might save even one life by staying the hand that would otherwise lower a boat and row toward that cursed shore. May God have mercy on any who ignore this warning, for the giants of that island shall have none. Written this day, the 15th of March 1552, by my own hand. Thomas Blackwell, formerly able seaman aboard His Majesty's vessel Providence, now resident of Plymouth, England. Historical note. This manuscript was discovered in the archives of the Plymouth Maritime Museum in 1847, among a collection of personal papers donated by the Blackwell family. Subsequent research has identified several Spanish and Portuguese accounts from the early 16th century describing encounters with indigenous peoples of unusual stature in the Caribbean region. Modern anthropological evidence suggests that certain isolated island populations may indeed have practiced ritualistic cannibalism during this period, though the extreme physical dimensions described in these accounts remain unverified and are generally considered exaggerated by contemporary historians. The exact location of the island described in Blackwell's account has never been conclusively identified. Several islands in the Caribbean were known to resist European colonization for decades, though none match all the details provided in this narrative. Whether through natural disaster, disease, or eventual conquest, the culture Blackwell described, if it existed as he claimed, has long since vanished from the historical record. The account stands as a reminder of the genuine dangers faced by early European explorers and the often tragic consequences of contact between vastly different cultures during the age of exploration.